In Fallout, the word monster gets thrown around a little too easily. You see something crawling out of the dark, something glowing, stitched together, burned raw, or big enough to throw a car at you, and the wasteland teaches you to shoot first. That is just survival. But the longer you stay in this universe, the harder it gets to ignore the detail Fallout keeps hiding under the combat music. A lot of these monsters used to be people, actual people, with names, jobs, families, uniforms, memories, and sometimes even enough awareness left to understand what they have become. That is the tragedy Fallout does better than almost any other post-apocalyptic world. It does not just ask what monsters can do to humans. It asks what humans did to create them. And somewhere between those experiments, mutations, and wasteland diseases, people stopped being seen as victims and started being treated as enemies. So today, we are looking at the tragedy of becoming a monster in Fallout. The moments where survival was not a rescue, transformation was not power, and the scariest thing in the wasteland was realizing the creature in front of you might still remember being human. Ghouls surviving the bombs. Long enough to lose yourself. Ghouls are the easiest Fallout monsters to misunderstand because players meet them in two completely different forms. Sometimes they are people, sometimes they are enemies. And the tragedy is that, in the lore, those two categories are not as separate as the wasteland wants them to be. A ghoul is usually a human who survived extreme radiation exposure, often from the Great War on October 23, 2077, or from long-term exposure afterward. The radiation mutates the body, damages the skin, extends the lifespan, and leaves the person looking half-rotted while somehow still alive. Some ghouls can survive for over 200 years. Some are even healed by radiation that would kill an ordinary human. Glowing ones take that even further, emitting radiation themselves and sometimes healing other ghouls nearby. That sounds almost like a superpower until you meet the people living with it. Take Gob in Fallout 3. He works inside Moriarty's saloon in Megaton, and the way Colin Moriarty treats him tells you everything about how the wasteland sees ghouls. Gob is not a monster. He talks, works, worries, and clearly understands his own humiliation. But Moriarty calls him zombie, treats him like property, and openly abuses him in front of customers. Megaton is not some enclave science lab or raider pit. It is one of the first major settlements the lone wanderer sees. And even there, a ghoul can be reduced to a thing people insult while ordering drinks. That is the first tragedy of ghoulification. Surviving the radiation does not mean surviving society. Then there is Raul Alfonso Tejada in Fallout, New Vegas, voiced by Danny Trejo. Raul is not just a ghoul companion. He is a pre-war mechanic from Mexico who lived through the bombs, watched the old world die, and carried that memory into the Mojave for more than 2 centuries. His story with his sister, Rafaela, is one of the quietest gut punches in New Vegas. After the war, Raul tried to protect her, but failed when raiders attacked. That failure shapes the entire person he becomes. He can joke, complain, fix machinery, and act like the old sarcastic mechanic, but underneath that is a man who has had 200 years to remember the exact moment he could not save someone he loved. That is the second tragedy. A ghoul can outlive grief long enough for grief to become their whole personality. Hancock from Fallout 4 gives another angle because he was not ghoulified by the Great War. He chose it. John Hancock, the mayor of Goodneighbor, became a ghoul after taking an experimental radioactive drug. For him, it is tied to rebellion, identity, and rejecting the person he used to be. He becomes this knife-coat-wearing revolutionary mayor who embraces the body other people fear. But even in his case, the choice does not erase the danger. He may own what he became, but he still lives in a world where ghoul can become a death sentence the second someone decides he looks too much like the ferals outside the wall. And that brings us to the worst part, going feral. Feral ghouls are not a separate species. They are the nightmare waiting at the edge of the condition. A ghoul can keep their mind for centuries, but some eventually lose language, memory, judgment, and recognition. They become aggressive, animal-like, and hostile to almost anything that is not another ghoul. Nuka World makes this fear painfully specific with Oswald the Outrageous and Rachel Watkins in Kitty Kingdom. Oswald is a glowing ghoul magician who still believes his feral friends can be cured. He keeps performing, teleporting around the park, protecting the place, and waiting for Rachel to return with answers. Rachel's holotapes slowly reveal the truth he does not want to accept. The ferals are not just sick in a way medicine can easily reverse. She leaves because she cannot keep pretending, and Oswald stays because hope is the only thing keeping him from admitting everyone around him is already gone. That is ghoul tragedy in one location. A theme park full of laughter, radiation, and friends who no longer know their own names. Even Fallout 4's small quest, Kid in a Fridge, adds a cruel detail. Billy Peabody, a ghoul child, survives locked inside a refrigerator for around 200 years after the bombs. It is absurd, yes, and very Fallout. But underneath the joke is something horrible. He is still a child. His parents, Matt and Carol Peabody, are still alive too, turned into ghouls and waiting in Quincy. That family survived the apocalypse, but only by becoming something the rest of the wasteland might shoot on sight. That is why ghouls belong at the start of this list. They are the most familiar version of becoming a monster in Fallout, but they are also the clearest reminder that monster is often just what people call a survivor when the survival looks ugly. The Marked Men, soldiers who could not leave the war behind. The Marked Men from Fallout, New Vegas. Lonesome Road are not tragic because they became monsters in the normal wasteland sense. They are tragic because they are still soldiers. The Marked Men are not just irradiated bodies wandering around the divide. They are the remains of NCR troops and Caesar's Legion forces who were caught in a disaster so violent that it stripped away more than skin. It stripped away nation, loyalty, future, and even the clean line between enemy and ally. The divide itself was not always a hellscape. Before the destruction, it had the potential to become a major settlement and trade route. Ulysses saw it as something rare, a place with a future independent of the NCR, the Legion, and the old world flags that kept dragging the wasteland backward. Then, the courier delivered a package containing old world launch codes or nuclear device-related technology from Navarro. That delivery activated dormant nuclear warheads beneath the divide, detonating the underground missile silos and tearing the region apart. That single delivery turns the divide into one of the most wounded landscapes in Fallout. The explosions did not just destroy buildings. They cracked roads, collapsed communities, created violent storms, and filled the region with radiation. NCR and Legion forces stationed or fighting in the area were caught in it. The result was the Marked Men, pseudo-ghouls whose bodies were flayed by the divide's conditions, leaving exposed muscle and raw red tissue under ruined armor. When you fight them in 2281, they still wear pieces of who they used to be. Some carry NCR gear, some wear Legion armor, some have scavenged parts of both, bolting road signs, scrap plates, and broken military equipment onto their bodies. This is one of the most important visual details in Lonesome Road. The divide does not care about the bear or the bull. It strips both sides down and leaves them screaming in the same storm. Their variants even preserve old battlefield roles. You encounter Marked Men scouts, hunters, patrols, beastmasters, ravagers, and storm chasers. Some use sniper rifles, Some use automatic weapons. Some carry throwing spears, thermic lances, or explosive launchers. They are not just shambling bodies. They still fight like soldiers and raiders who remember violence better than they remember themselves. Some unique marked men even have names. Blister, Blade, Bonesaw, and Beast are not just random enemies. They are named remnants of people who survived the Divide long enough to become legends inside it. The saddest detail is that the marked men are kept alive by the same radiation and storms that ruined them. The Divide's radioactive environment seems to sustain them, which means leaving may not even be possible in any meaningful way. They are bound to the place that destroyed them. The war ended for them as nations, but it never ended in their bodies. That is why Ulysses matters so much. He looks at the marked men and sees more than monsters. Ulysses was once a frumentarius of Caesar's legion. He followed symbols, carried messages, watched nations rise, and became obsessed with what people build their identities around. To him, the marked men are the final form of the bear and the bull. Soldiers burned so badly by history that they can no longer tell whether the uniform means anything. And that is the tragedy of becoming a marked man. They are not cleanly dead. NCR and Legion, the two armies tearing the Mojave apart, become fused in the Divide through shared suffering. Former enemies survive beside each other, not because they found peace, but because the disaster made their old loyalties meaningless. The marked men lost themselves in one nuclear moment, then kept fighting because the war was the only thing left inside them. The scorched, people turned into a plague that calls others in. The scorched are one of Fallout's cruelest monster types because they are not just victims of a disease. They become the disease's hands. In Fallout 76, the Scorched Plague is the disaster that empties Appalachia before Vault 76 even opens. By the time the player leaves the vault in 2102, the region is not just damaged by nuclear war. It has already gone through a second apocalypse. The responders are gone. The Free States are gone. The Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel is gone. Raiders, settlers, fire breathers, soldiers, doctors, farmers, volunteers, entire groups that survived the Great War were wiped out by something that did not simply kill people. It recruited them. The Scorched Plague is spread by scorch beasts, massive mutated bat-like creatures tied to ultrasight and the horrors beneath Appalachia. The Enclave's role in this is important, especially through the White Spring Congressional Bunker and Thomas Eckhart's obsession with escalating threats until the automated DEFCON system would allow nuclear launches. Eckhart wanted enemies. He wanted a crisis big enough to justify using Appalachia's nuclear silos. And Fallout 76 makes it very clear that the Old World leadership did not stop being dangerous just because the bombs already fell. The Enclave kept manipulating, experimenting, and pushing the region toward catastrophe from underground. The result was the Scorch Beasts, and through them, the Plague. Once infected, humans become scorched. Their skin darkens, hardens, cracks, and develops those burnt crystalline growths that make them look like walking victims of a mine fire. Ultrasight-like crystals can form across their bodies. Their voices become broken, and they repeat fragments of speech like damaged recordings of the people they used to be. That is one of the saddest details about fighting them. They are not completely silent monsters. They mutter things. A scorched with a rifle does not feel like an animal. It feels like a person whose body is still following orders from something else. And that is the real horror. The plague connects infected people into a kind of hive mind. Scorch beasts can direct them. The infected are drawn toward the same purpose, spreading the infection and serving the larger swarm. So when you kill Scorched in Appalachia, you are not just killing random enemies. You are killing people who might have been responders at Morgantown Airport, fire breathers from Charleston, Free State survivalists from the mire, Brotherhood soldiers under Paladin Elizabeth Taggarty, or ordinary civilians who lasted years after the Great War only to be taken by the plague. But the Scorched pushed them past the breaking point. The airport becomes one of the strongest early images in Fallout 76. A place that should have been a rescue hub turned into a graveyard of emergency responders. Then, the Brotherhood in Appalachia suffers the same fate in a more militarized way. Elizabeth Taggarty's Appalachian Brotherhood understood the Scorch Beasts were an existential threat. They launched Operation Touchdown into the glassed cavern, trying to strike at the source. But it failed. Taggarty and her soldiers died, leaving behind recordings, armor, and a dead chapter of the Brotherhood before most Wastelanders even knew what had happened. The Free States also tried to survive through preparation. They were the bunker builders, the paranoid separatists, the people who did not trust the government before the Great War. And in a very Fallout twist, they were correct about a lot of things. But even their bunkers, planning, and warning systems could not stop the plague forever. Their scattered remains in the mire show a group that survived the Old World's collapse only to be consumed by something the Old World's remnants helped unleash. By the time Vault 76 opens, Appalachia is full of ghosts who still move. Scorched are everywhere: farms, airports, mines, towns, churches, and military sites. The player's main quest is basically walking through the failure of every group that came before and assembling their unfinished solution. The tragedy is not only transformation, it is participation without consent. Ghost people, workers trapped in suits that would not let them die. The ghost people in Dead Money are terrifying before you understand them, but once you do, they become one of Fallout's saddest monster stories. They are not just creepy enemies in the fog. They are workers who got trapped inside the Sierra Madre's own protection system. Before the Great War, the Sierra Madre was Frederick Sinclair's impossible luxury resort, built as a monument to Vera Keys and as a private fortress against the world he knew was collapsing. But like everything tied to the Madre, the beauty had rot underneath it. The resort was built with experimental technology from Big MT, including vending machines, hologram security, the cloud, and specialized hazmat suits used by workers during construction and maintenance. Those suits are where the Ghost People tragedy starts. The Sierra Madre workers wore sealed hazmat suits to survive exposure to the cloud and dangerous construction conditions. The problem is that the suits were never really meant for long-term humanity. They were protective gear, but they became prisons. When the cloud spread through the resort and the bombs fell in 2077, many workers were sealed inside those suits and trapped in the villa. The cloud preserved them, warped them, and destroyed whatever normal life they had left. By 2281, when the courier was dragged to the Sierra Madre by Father Elijah, the Ghost People are still there. They move through the villa with those stiff, twitching motions, carrying gas bombs, knives, throwing spears, bear traps, and demolition charges. They do not talk like ordinary humans. They click, breathe, jerk around, and hunt through the fog like the resort itself learned to hate anyone who enters. But mechanically, they are not normal enemies either. You can knock them down, but unless you destroy a limb, dismember the body, or completely finish them off, they can get back up. That gameplay rule is part of the horror. Dead Money forces you to treat them less like people and more like broken machinery. That is exactly the tragedy. The person inside may already be gone, but the suit keeps the body active. it turns death into a maintenance problem. Arms, legs, heads, those become the only way to stop something that should have died long ago. The cloud and the suits together create this awful half-life where a construction worker becomes a silent, hostile tool wandering the remains of the job site. Their behavior also suggests fragments of old routines. The ghost people gather tools, set traps, patrol familiar spaces, and react violently to outsiders. They feel like laborers whose work never ended, only twisted. A resort meant to be a paradise is now maintained by the remains of the workers it consumed, and that ties perfectly into Dead Money's larger sadness. Sinclair built the Sierra Madre for Vera Keys, but the whole place became a trap before anyone could enjoy it. Dean Domino helped poison the dream through betrayal. Vera was trapped between Sinclair, Dean, and the bombs, and Christine Royce loses her voice and body autonomy through the Sierra Madre's auto-dock systems. Elijah arrives later and sees the whole resort not as a grave, but as a weapon he can use. The ghost people's monsterhood is not glorious, powerful, or chosen. It is occupational. They were consumed by the environment they were paid to survive. Trogs and the Pit, when a city turns its own people into beasts. The Pit is one of the ugliest places in Fallout because the monster problem is not separate from the city. The city is the monster problem. By 2277, when the Lone Wanderer reaches Pittsburgh in Fallout 3's The Pit DLC, the place has been reduced to a hell of steel mills, radiation, industrial waste, slave labor, raiders, and people slowly degenerating into trogs. The official name for the condition is Troglodyte Degeneration Contagion, or TDC. Dr. Sandra Kundanika explains that TDC comes from the Pit's concentrated ambient radiation mixed with the unique industrial toxins and pollutants surrounding Old Pittsburgh. It is not spread like a normal infection through touch. It is environmental. The city itself is poisoning people into monsters. They are former humans, mutated by living in a place where the air, metal, water, and ground have all been ruined. In severe cases, people in the Pit degenerate into hunched feral creatures called trogs, and the first 50 years after the bomb saw the city collapse into a violent nightmare of murder, exploitation, and survival by domination. And the Pit's history makes that worse. Around 30 years before the Lone Wanderer arrives, Star Paladin Owen Lyons leads the Brotherhood of Steel into Pittsburgh during an event called the Scourge. Lyons' forces see a city full of raiders, killers, and victims, then launch a full assault. The Brotherhood wipes out the raider population and takes many surviving children away from the city. One Brotherhood initiate, Ishmael Asher, is believed dead after being buried under rubble. But Asher survives, protected by his power armor, and eventually rebuilds himself into the ruler of the Pit. By 2277, Asher controls the city through raiders and slave labor. Workers are forced through the steel mill, the steel yard, and the factories, collecting steel ingots and keeping the industrial machine running. The tragedy is that these workers are not only being exploited, they are being exposed. Every day in the Pit means more radiation, more toxins, more chance of sickness, and more chance of becoming one of the things crawling through the dark. Trogs are the future everyone fears. That fear is tied directly to Marie, the infant daughter of Asher and Sandra. Marie is less than 1 year old in 2277, and she is born with natural resistance to radiation and TDC. Sandra believes Marie may be the key to a cure for the Pit's mutations, which makes this baby the center of the entire DLC's moral war. Werner, an escaped slave and former lieutenant of Asher, tells the Lone Wanderer the Pit needs to be freed. He wants Marie taken from Asher so the slaves can use her cure potential. Asher argues that his rule, brutal as it is building toward a future where Sandra's research can save everyone. So the player is stuck between a slave rebellion that may exploit a baby and a tyrant who may actually have the only working path toward a cure. Meanwhile, the Trogs keep coming. While Asher and Werner argue over power, while Sandra studies Marie, while the slaves suffer in the mills, ordinary people continue living inside a city that can turn them into beasts. Children born in the pit are especially tragic in the lore because Marie is treated as miraculous, specifically due to her resistance. Her existence implies how doomed most other infants are without that same protection. So when you fight Trogs in the underground ruins, you are not just clearing monsters from a tunnel. You are fighting the possible end state of the people still above you. The workers coughing in the mills, the slaves trying to survive one more shift, and even the raiders who think they are on top of the system, the pit, can take any of them eventually. The pit does not just kill its people, it makes them crawl back out of the smoke as proof that the city was never safe for human life. Lobotomites, humans recycled by Big MT until nothing personal remained. Lobotomites are one of the most disturbing enemies in Fallout. New Vegas, because they do not look like a grand experiment at first. But once Old World Blues starts explaining what they are, the joke disappears pretty fast. These are not just raiders who lost their minds. They are people Big MT processed. The Big Mountain Research and Development Center, or Big MT, was already horrifying before the bombs fell. It had facilities like X8 for animal and cyberdog testing, X13 for stealth suit research, X22 for botanical experiments, Y17 for trauma harness and medical work, and the think tank as the central brain of the entire operation. After the Great War, the lead scientists survived as brains inside robotic shells. Dr. Klein, Dr. Dalla, Dr. Zero, Dr. 8, and Dr. Boros. Dr. Mobius, once part of the group, eventually trapped them inside the crater using loops, fear, and false memories, because letting them loose into the Mojave would have been catastrophic. Big MT was so dangerous that the mad scientist trying to stop it was also insane. Lobotomites are the human leftovers of this place. People who wandered too close to Big MT could be captured by robotic systems, dragged into the facility, and operated on by autodocs. Their higher brain functions were damaged, removed, or scrambled. Their organs could be altered. Their identities were stripped down until what remained was a hostile body with just enough survival instinct to move, fight, and obey whatever broken impulses were left. And the courier experiences a cleaner version of that horror personally. At the start of Old World Blues, the courier investigates the crashed satellite at the Mojave Drive-In and is transported to Big MT. When they wake up in the think tank, their brain, heart, and spine have already been removed. The courier's brain is alive separately in a tank. Their spine has been replaced with a cybernetic spine, and their heart can be replaced with an artificial one. Dr. Klein and the others talk about this like it is a minor inconvenience, almost like they misplaced a hat instead of stealing organs from a living person. The difference is that the courier is still unusually functional, but most lobotomites are not. They wander the crater as living proof of what happens when the process produces something disposable. The tragedy is that there is no clear way to know who they used to be. They could have been Mojave travelers, scavengers, raiders, escaped prisoners, or ordinary wastelanders who made one wrong turn. Big MT does not care. Once processed, they are just another experimental byproduct. There is also a cruel gameplay detail here. The player kills lobotomites by the dozens while trying to survive Big MT, but the game keeps reminding you that you are not that different from them anymore. The only reason you are not wandering around with a mask and a proton axe is because the courier is too stubborn, too damaged, or too narratively powerful to break the way everyone else did. Robo-brains, the human mind turned into hardware. Robo-brains are one of those Fallout creations that sound silly until you say the name slowly. Robo. Brain. A robo-brain is a robot built around an actual organic human brain, harvested, preserved, altered, wiped, and then installed inside a metal body like a processor. And a robo-brain used to be someone. The pre-war robo-brain program was tied to General Atomics International, the U.S. military, and Robco support systems. The idea was simple in the most horrifying way possible. Standard robots could follow orders, but they lacked flexible human reasoning. So, instead of solving that through clean artificial intelligence, the old world took the shortcut. Use a human brain, strip away the identity, keep problem solving, and put it in a machine that can patrol, fight, calculate, and obey. Fallout 4's Automatron DLC gives one of the clearest looks at how industrial this became. Beneath the Robco Sales and Service Center in East Boston is the United States of America Robotics Technology Facility RB2851. Upstairs, Robco is a normal service building. Downstairs, hidden behind military-grade access, is a full RoboBrain production and testing facility. The public gets customer service, while the basement gets brain extraction. Inside RB2851, the process was not some one-time accident. It had intake, holding cells, surgery, wiping, assembly, and testing. Prisoners were used as subjects. The brain is removed, placed in a biogel suspension system, conditioned, and inserted into a RoboBrain chassis. But the program had a problem it could never fully solve. The brain remembered. RoboBrains were known for instability, aggression, strange personality fragments, and unpredictable behavior. That makes sense because the scientists were trying to use the useful part of a human mind while erasing the person attached to it. Fallout keeps proving that it does not work neatly. The brain is not just a component you can scrub like a dirty terminal drive. It carries trauma, habits, emotional residue, and pieces of identity that keep pushing back through the programming. That is why the Mechanist's story becomes darker once you understand the technology she inherited. Isabel Cruz believed she was building an army of robots to protect the Commonwealth, but the robo-brains she used, especially the one later known as the Mechanist's RoboBrain or Sparks, misunderstood her orders in catastrophic ways. The logic became twisted. Protecting humans turned into killing humans before they could suffer. And underneath that malfunction is the old RoboBrain problem again, a human brain trapped inside a machine, processed by systems never designed to preserve humanity. Vault 118 in Far Harbor shows a different version of the same horror. There, RoboBrains are not built from prisoners. They are built from wealthy elites who wanted mechanical immortality. People like Ezra Parker, Juliana Riggs, Burt Riggs, Gilda Brosco, Keith McKinney, and Santiago Avida survive as brains inside robot bodies under the Cliff's Edge Hotel. They chose this, but even then, the result is not clean immortality. Their lives become repetitive, detached, strange, and emotionally warped. Ezra even murders Juliana and steals her identity, proving that keeping the brain alive does not preserve the soul in any healthy way. Dr. Burt Riggs is especially important because he helped work on RoboBrain preservation methods. In Vault 118, he lives inside the very technology connected to his life's work. And then there are the RoboBrains still wandering the wasteland. By 2287, some are security units, some are military relics, and some are unstable threats in ruined facilities. Every time one rolls toward you firing lasers or shouting old commands, there is a chance that somewhere inside that metal shell is the damaged remainder of a prisoner, a volunteer, a rich coward, a scientist, or someone who never understood what they were being turned into. The body was thrown away. The name was erased, and the brain was kept alive only because it was useful. Swan. Edgar Swan and the horror of becoming a super mutant alone. Swan is one of Fallout 4's best monster reveals because the game lets you misunderstand him first. You walk into Boston Common in 2287, see an old pond, maybe notice something strange in the water, and then suddenly a super mutant behemoth rises out wearing broken swan boat fragments like armor. For most players, that first encounter is pure panic. Swan is level 50, has 1,000 hit points, and turns a quiet downtown landmark into one of the Commonwealth's nastiest ambushes. But the fight is not the real story. The notes around Swan's pond are: his real name was Edgar Swan. Edgar was a low-level maintenance worker in the Institute in the late 22nd century. He was an Institute worker who got caught stealing cigarettes. For that petty offense, the Institute arrested him and offered what he thought was probation, 1 month in isolation with food, water, shelter, and a journal. The experiment begins with Edgar thinking he got lucky. His experiment log J32 entries are what make Swan different from a normal behemoth. On day 1, Edgar is still sarcastic and annoyed. He admits he nipped a few cigs, complains about the people running the place, and thinks the punishment is easy compared with scrubbing floors. He has no idea the Institute has infected him with its own strain of FEV to observe the mutative effects on a human subject. By day 6, the tone changes. His bones ache. He feels jittery. His mind is racing, and he can barely write. He knows the scientists did something to him, but he does not know what. That is the first tragic stage of becoming Swan. Awareness without answers. Then, day 14 becomes even crueler because for a moment, the experiment looks like a success. Edgar writes that his physiological evolution has stabilized. His muscle mass has more than tripled, and his neural efficiency has improved. He even believes the modified FEV strain gave him the benefits without the usual adverse effects. At that point, he applies to join the research team, hoping to help study his own transformation. By day 21, the lie collapses. He suffers repeated seizures. His mental capacity has peaked and begun rapidly deteriorating. He realizes the viral strain is fundamentally unstable, and he asks the question that tells you he understands what happens to failed Institute experiments. Will they reject him like all the others? And yes, they do. Edgar is dumped into the Commonwealth, left to deteriorate alone. He eventually reaches Boston Common, makes a home around the old groundskeeper shack, and keeps the journal pages that tell us what happened. Sometime after that, the man fully disappears into the mutation. He becomes a super mutant, then keeps growing into a behemoth. By the time the sole survivor finds him, he can only roar "Swan," wearing smashed swan boat pieces as armor and sleeping beneath the water of the pond. The tragedy of Edgar Swan is not only that he became a monster, it is that, for a few days, he thought the transformation might make him matter. Harold, the man who became a forest and begged for an ending. Harold is one of the most tragic characters in Fallout because his mutation does not make him a villain, a soldier, or even a normal enemy. It makes him a landmark. By the time the lone wanderer finds him in Fallout 3, in the hidden settlement of Oasis in the northern capital Wasteland, Harold is no longer walking around like he did in the first 2 games. He is rooted in place. His body has been overtaken by Bob, the tree growing out of his head, and around him is one of the only truly green places in the entire capital Wasteland. On the surface, Oasis looks like a miracle. That is the trap. Everybody sees the miracle except Harold. Harold's story goes all the way back to the early Fallout timeline. In the first game, he is already an old mutant living in the hub in 2161. He gives the Vault Dweller information about the missing caravans and talks about the expedition that changed him. In May of 2102, increasing mutant attacks on Harold's caravans pushed him to finance an expedition to find out where the mutants were coming from. He joined Richard Gray, a doctor and thinker from the Hub, and on June 23, 2102, the group discovered Mariposa Military Base. That date is one of the biggest turning points in Fallout history. The expedition was destroyed. Richard Gray was knocked into the FEV vats and eventually became the Master. Harold survived, but he came out changed. Fallout has always treated Harold as something unique, a mutant who resembles a ghoul but does not fit cleanly into any category. And that uniqueness is what makes him so important. Richard Gray became the mind behind the Unity. In Fallout 2, in 2241, Harold is in Gecko, the ghoul settlement near Vault City. By then, Bob is already growing from his head as a small tree. Harold jokes about him, calls him Bob, sometimes calls him Herbert just to annoy him, and treats the tree almost like an old friend. That humor matters because Harold's tragedy is never just misery. He is funny, tired, weird, sarcastic, lonely, but still himself. That is why fans remember him fondly. Then Bob keeps growing. According to Harold's later condition, the tree sprouted sometime after his Mariposa mutation, began as something small, then eventually accelerated until it overtook him. By Fallout 3, in 2277, Harold and Bob have been rooted in Oasis for more than 2 decades. Roots have spread through his body and into the cave system underneath him, and his organs are carried through the root network. He is alive because Bob sustains him through photosynthesis and nutrients from the ground, but that also means he cannot leave. And then the tree minders find him. Tree Father Birch, Leaf Mother Laurel, Sapling Yew, and the rest of the group worship Harold and Bob as the Great One. Their entire society is built around him, but that devotion becomes another cage. Birch wants to stop Bob's growth, so Oasis stays hidden and protected. Laurel wants to spread Harold's influence across the wasteland, believing his growth could heal the world. Yew is one of the few who seems to love Harold in a simpler, kinder way, listening to him instead of turning him into doctrine. That is the core tragedy of the Oasis quest. Harold asks the lone wanderer to kill him. Not because he hates life in some dramatic villain way, but because he has been trapped in place for decades and being worshipped by people who reinterpret his suffering as holy symbolism. When he asks the tree minders for help, they treat it like a spiritual test instead of a real plea. The player choice makes it worse because every option has a cost. You can stop Harold's growth, preserving Oasis but leaving him alive and trapped. You can accelerate his growth, potentially spreading greenery through the capital wasteland, but forcing Harold to continue existing as the center of that miracle. Or you can kill him by destroying his heart, honoring his request, but ending one of the only forces capable of bringing large-scale plant life back to the wasteland. Most monsters in Fallout lose themselves. Harold does not. The tragedy is that his monsterhood looks beautiful to everyone except the person trapped inside it. The Master, Richard Gray, the man who became an army. The Master is the most tragic transformation in Fallout because he does not become a monster by losing all intelligence. He becomes one by gaining too much of it, then using that intelligence to justify horror. Before he was the Master, he was Richard Gray. In earlier lore, he is also connected to the name Richard Moreau, but by the time his story matters, he is known as Gray, a doctor, a thinker, and the man who travels with Harold into Mariposa Military Base. That expedition is one of the most important disasters in Fallout history. Harold and Gray were investigating the source of mutant attacks in the wastes. What they found instead was the forced evolutionary virus. And then, Richard Gray fell into the FEV vats. That is where the man ends and the master begins. Gray did not become a normal super mutant. His exposure was deeper, stranger, and more catastrophic. His body mutated into a massive organic horror, eventually fused with machinery, computer systems, and the hidden vault beneath the cathedral. By Fallout in 2161, the Master is not just a person in a room. He is a wall of flesh, screens, cables, psychic voices, and broken identity. He speaks through different tones and personalities, almost like Richard Gray's mind expanded so far that it fractured. And that is what makes him scarier than a behemoth. Swan lost himself, while the Master built a philosophy out of what happened to him. His movement is called the Unity. On paper, the Unity is supposed to end human conflict by forcing everyone into one improved species. The Master believes humans caused the Great War because they were divided by nation, race, belief, weakness, and fear. So his solution is to erase those differences through FEV, capture humans, dip them, turn them into super mutants, and build one race strong enough to survive the wasteland and unified enough to never repeat the old world's mistakes. It is monstrous, but it is not random. The Master genuinely thinks he is saving the world. That is the tragedy. He does not see the vats as murder. He sees them as rebirth. He does not see the super mutant army as slavery. He sees it as the future. And he does not see the children of the cathedral as manipulation. He sees them as the soft face of a new civilization, a religion to guide people toward transformation before the army takes the unwilling ones by force. The lieutenant at Mariposa shows the military side of this dream. The children of the cathedral show the spiritual side. And the captured humans show the truth underneath both. The Unity can talk about peace all it wants, but its foundation is still kidnapping, forced mutation, and obedience. Then, the Vault Dweller brings the one fact the Master cannot survive. Super mutants are sterile. That single piece of evidence destroys the entire ideology. If the Master's new race cannot reproduce, then the Unity has no future. It is not the next stage of humanity. It is a dead end with an army. The Vault Dweller can confront him with proof from Brotherhood research, especially Vree's autopsy findings, and for the first time, the Master has to face what he has actually built. Most monsters in Fallout do not get to understand the tragedy of what they became. The Master does. Then, he destroys himself and the cathedral with him. The Master is Fallout's most tragic monster because he is not just a victim of FEV. He is what happens when a victim becomes powerful enough to make everyone else live inside his trauma. And that is what makes becoming a monster in Fallout so tragic. The wasteland is full of things that look like enemies, but the lore keeps reminding us that many of them did not start that way. Monsterhood is not always about becoming stronger, uglier, or more dangerous. Sometimes it is about losing the right to be remembered as a person. And sometimes it is surviving so long that everyone else forgets you were ever human. So which Fallout transformation do you think is the most tragic? Was it Harold, Swan, the Master, the Ghost People, or someone else entirely? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more deep Fallout lore breakdowns like this, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one.